Hey, what is up guys, Merganman4 here, and today we finally have a brand new collection box set to talk about. It's been quite a long time since the last one thanks to the pandemic, but thankfully it seems things are finally starting to get back on track. So today we're going to be talking about Season 8, a landmark season for many reasons. So, a whole half century on, how does Jon Pertwee's second season stand the test of time? Let's find out. Season 8 was certainly one of introductions. We have a new member of the Unit family in the form of Mike Yates, a new companion for the Doctor in Joe Grant, and a new nemesis in rival Time Lord the Master, one of the show's most iconic foes, and one who continues to menace the Doctor to this very day. Co-created by producer Barry Letts and script editor Terrence Dix, they were so proud of their new villain that they decided to have him feature in every single story of the season, a feat which has never been repeated since. But with that, why don't we delve into the season of the Master with his very first appearance in Terror of the Autons. There's a lot going on in Terror of the Autons, and a lot to admire. There is, of course, the previously mentioned introductions. It's a great first story for Jo, who makes an immediate impression as someone who may not be the brightest, but she tries her best, and Katy Manning imbues her with this wonderful charm that just continues to grow throughout her time on the show. And together with Jon Pertwee, they make up one of the very best Doctor-companion pairings we've ever had, even to this day. Mike Yates is less well served here. He's fine enough, but he doesn't really get a lot to do, and on the whole, his role feels pretty disposable. He's much better served in some of the other stories this season. But of course, the biggest introduction here is that of the Master, and Roger Delgado is instantly magnificent in the role, giving a performance that's simultaneously calm and collected, and yet full of menace. Autons may not be Delgado's finest outing, but it's a strong enough introduction, and the latter half features some great scenes between the Doctor and the Master when they finally meet. But what about the story itself? Well, as in the title, it features the Autons making a reappearance from the previous season's Spearhead from Space. They're well utilized here, and we get some great additions to their plastic controlling powers. The daffodils are a fantastic idea, and the troll doll is rather memorable as well. Although, why don't we just ignore that dodgy CSO? It isn't a particularly deep or complex story, and it doesn't quite live up to the story it's a sequel to, but all the same, it's a fun 4 episodes, and the introduction of Jo and the Master are a real highlight. It's an 8 out of 10 for me. Much as I enjoy Terror of the Autons, I think the Mind of Evil is really where this season's new additions come into their own. Mike Yates is given a lot more to do here, which is great to see, and Benton and the Brigadier continue to be as entertaining as ever. The Master, too, improves upon his previous appearance, good as he was in Terror, with him taking over Stayingmore Prison, and eventually the Missile, in great fashion. And as always, he shares plenty of memorable interactions with Pertwee's Third Doctor. In fact, I'd say the one element that's perhaps weaker than in Terror is Joe Grant. She's not bad by any stretch, and Katy Manning is as charming as ever, but her inclusion mostly feels like she's there because she has to be, not because the story needs her to be. But leaving the lead characters aside, I find The Mind of Evil to be a fascinating story on its own. I love the setting, which is used to fantastic effect, and the Keller Machine provides a unique and interesting threat by attacking people via bringing their worst fears to life. Perhaps my one significant complaint about this story is its repetitive cliffhangers. Otherwise though, The Mind of Evil is definitely a hit, and just with Terror before it, is worthy of an 8 out of 10. I have to admit, I never really used to think much of Claws of Axos. I mean, I've always enjoyed it, but it's a story that's never really stood out to me in any way. I've always just thought of it as bang average. Admittedly, my overall opinion on it hasn't changed that much, but after rewatching it with this set, I've gained a brand new appreciation for it, and I certainly have more to say about it than I would have before. I think perhaps the biggest thing that stands out to me is just how stylish this story is. The designs of the Axons and Axos itself are striking, and there's plenty of effective visual effects throughout it. It's shot extremely well too, with lots of visually interesting action and memorable cinematography, something that honestly can't be said of all that many classic Who stories. And the audio work is a standout too, something that I typically don't notice as much as the visual side of things. There's a particular sound cue that repeats throughout the story that I just find simply haunting, and it works so well. Without doubt, I think this is the best story of the season from a production standpoint. The only one that really might rival it is probably the Dæmons. The story's interesting too, with a seemingly benevolent race of aliens secretly scheming to drain the Earth dry. And it's the first story that really begins to delve into the Doctor and the Master's complex relationship, and gives a twist on the last couple stories by making the Master an, albeit temporary, ally to Unit as well. All in all, it's a really enjoyable time, and while it's never going to be one of my favorite stories, it's certainly stronger than I had given it credit for in the past. A solid 7.5 out of 10. At long last, 8 stories into his run, the Third Doctor finally gets to leave Earth and venture into space, albeit at the behest of the Time Lords. It's just a shame that what we get is, well, this. Look, there's a really good story at the core here, but I don't think it's at all controversial for me to say that 6 episodes, it's simply too much. It's a story that really drags its feet, and even despite that, it doesn't feel as though the colony or most of the guest cast are fleshed out nearly as much as they should be in that runtime. And, to be honest, the conflict simply isn't that interesting until the Master and the natives of the planet start playing a larger role, and it's because of that very reason that the last episode is by far my favorite of the story. In fact, the last episode is some of my favorite material between the Doctor and the Master of the season, as their old friendship really shines through here in a fascinating way, and for the first time we truly begin to see why the Master does what he does. Like I said, there is a really good story in here somewhere, but as it is, it's simply fine. Not the worst thing ever, just could have been so much more. I'll be giving Colony in Space 6 out of 10. Okay, I've got a bit of a confession to make. I've never really cared for the Dæmons. Don't get me wrong, it's still a fine story, but it's honestly one of my least favorite Pertwees, and I've just never really got the hype. Honestly, I do love the production side of it. It's incredibly atmospheric, has fantastic performances from everyone around, and it's shot really well. I've just never really engaged with the story. I find Bach unfortunately laughable, which is a shame because I can usually look past shoddy monsters. Heck, I love Invasion of the Dinosaurs. I don't find Azal particularly threatening, and his defeat happens way too quick and is almost nonsensical. And I feel like it's easily Roger Delgado's weakest material as the Master. And for a story that's 2 hours long, it honestly feels like barely anything happens. Now that's not to say that it bores me, it doesn't, but more to say that the plot is just a bit too thin for its length. I don't want to be all negative. Like I said, I love the production side of the story, and I'm still pretty entertained by it. But unfortunately, I just can't get behind the love for it. I wish I could give it higher, but I really can't justify anything more than a 6.5 out of 10. I'm really glad I got the opportunity to revisit Season 8 here. I tend to think of it as only mid-tier Who, and while I still don't necessarily disagree with that position, I did have quite a bit of fun watching these stories through again. It's fantastic seeing the beginnings of the Third Doctor and Jo's relationship, who in their next couple of seasons go on to become one of my all-time favorite Doctor companion duos. Meanwhile, the Master is of course fantastic, and while it's a little bit ridiculous to have him pop up in every single story of the season, given Roger Delgado's untimely death, we're very fortunate in hindsight that they decided to do so, and every time his Master pops up, it's a great joy to see him. I think Season 8 is probably also the peak for the Unit era, with the full team finally in place, and I can't really think of a better word than comfortable. In fact, that's probably how I'd describe the season on the whole. It's not the best, but it's absolutely a good time, and I think the series regulars, from Unit to the Master to the Doctor and Jo, are what really brings the season together and makes it work. It's good stuff. It's hard to believe, but Season 8 brings us just about a third of the way through the classic series. Time really does fly. But with the main review out of the way, why don't we look at how the season ranks, both within itself and compared to the other 7 seasons released so far. So, of Season 8's stories, The Mind of Evil takes the top spot with an 8 out of 10, with Terror of the Autons not far behind, also being an 8. The Claws of Axos brings up third with a 7.5 out of 10, followed by the Dæmons with a 6.5 out of 10, and finally Colony in Space with a 6 out of 10. Compared to the other seasons, Season 8 unfortunately doesn't make it too far, only surpassing Season 19. It ties with Season 12 with an overall score of 7.2 out of 10, although I'll place it just above it because the quality is more consistent throughout the season. This lowers the score for Jon Pertwee's era to a 7.5 out of 10, taking him from second from the top to second from the bottom, though his era is still fairly close behind both the Bakers. In terms of writers from the season, Robert Holmes moves up a spot to 7th with an average of 8.36 out of 10, while Don Houghton enters the ranking in 10th with an 8 out of 10. Robert Sloman and Barry Lett's next contribution, bringing them down to 14th with a 7.75 out of 10. Bob Baker and Dave Martin remaining in 17th with a 7.38 out of 10. And finally, Malcolm Hulke drops down to 20th with a 6.75 out of 10. Of the 3 producers we've seen in the collection so far, Barry Letts remains in the middle with a new average of 7.47 out of 10, while script editor Terrence Dicks moves down to 3rd place with an average of 7.5 out of 10. The season's directors are now ranked as followed. Barry Letts in 6th with an 8.25 out of 10, Timothy Coombe coming in 8th with an 8 out of 10, Michael Ferguson in 14th with a 7.5 out of 10, Christopher Barry dropping to 18th with a 7 out of 10, and finally Michael E. Bryant, who has unfortunately been stuck down here since the beginning thanks to Revenge of the Cybermen, with Colony in Space not helping matters, placing him in 19th out of 22 directors with an average score of 6.75 out of 10. Meanwhile, the Season 8 premiere, Terror of the Autons, makes it into 3rd place of all the premieres, while the Dæmons pulls off the opposite, coming in 6th for the finales, or 3rd from the bottom. These editions have changed the premiere and finale averages to 7.31 and 6.56 out of 10, respectively. And finally, it's time to update the top and bottom 10s. Well, one of them, anyway. Unfortunately, Season 8 didn't have any stories strong enough to crack the top 10, with the minimum score of entry currently being an 8.5 out of 10. While the bottom 10 gains 2 new stories in the form of Colony in Space, which is 5th from the bottom, and The Dæmons, which is 8th from the bottom. Overall, out of the 43 stories I've reviewed so far, The Mind of Evil is Season 8's highest, coming in at 18th place, Terror of the Autons comes in 20th, The Claws of Axos in 26th, The Dæmons in 36th, and finally, Colony in Space in 39th. And there we have it, another season done. Honestly, while far from a favorite, I did enjoy myself more this time around than I had anticipated. It may not be the best of the best, but for the most part, it's still a pretty good time. And with that, I hope you enjoyed my review of Season 8, and please leave your thoughts on the season down in the comments below. Murgaman 4, over and out, and I'll see you guys later.